Hurricane Idalia blew a flamboyance or flock of 300-400 flamingos that was likely migrating between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba off course in August 2023 and unceremoniously deposited the birds across a wide swath of the eastern United States, from Florida's Gulf Coast all the way up to Wisconsin and east to Pennsylvania. After Hurricane Idalia, more than 300 credible sightings of flamingos across the eastern U.S. were reported. Audubon, Florida, I'm an estuarine scientist. That means I study ecosystems where fresh water flows into the ocean. I spent 35 years with Audubon, Florida, studying the ecology of American flamingos and other wading birds in Florida Bay, Everglades National Park. So naturally, I was thrilled and intrigued by the sudden arrival of these flamingos. One of the birds was rescued in the Tampa area after nearly drowning in the Gulf of Mexico. His rescuers named him Peaches. A colleague and I were able to place a GPS tracking device and a bright blue band around his spindly leg with the code US02 engraved in white letters. Melissa Edwards, avian hospital director at Seaside Seabird Sanctuary, holds Peaches still, while Dr. Frank Ritchie of Zoo Miami and the author, Dr. Jerome Lawrence, place a band and GPS tracker on his leg. Dr. Lawrence has banded or supervised the banding of nearly 3,000 roseate spoonbills, but Peaches was his first and only flamingo to date. Photo by Linda Lawrence. We were hoping to track his movements and see whether he ended up settling in Florida. Unfortunately, a few days after Peaches was released back into the wilds of Tampa Bay, the tracking device failed. His last reported sighting was on a beach near Marco Island on Oct. 5, 2023. Then, in June 2025, I received an email from colleagues at the Rio Lagatos Biosphere Reserve in Yucatan, Mexico, who had photographed Peaches, blue band still in place, nesting in the reserve. Peaches' story is the latest piece in the historical puzzle of flamingos in Florida. Though the native population disappeared more than 100 years ago, recent events lead me to believe that flamingos may be coming back to the Sunshine State, and that their return has been facilitated by the concerted effort to restore the Everglades and coastal ecosystems. Decimation of a population in 1972. Ornithologist and founder of the National Audubon's Everglades Science Center, Robert Porter Allen, wrote The Flamingos, Their Life History and Survival, which is still considered a seminal document on the history of flamingos in Florida. In his book, Allen cites several historical and scientific manuscripts from the 1800s that indicate flamboyances of hundreds to thousands were seen in the Everglades, Florida Bay, and the Florida Keys. Allen documents the demise of flamingos in the late 1800s in Florida and throughout the Caribbean and Bahamian range. Like all wading birds in Florida, they fell victim to the women's fashion trend of adorning hats with bird feathers. Wading bird feathers were literally worth their weight in gold. Led by the National Association of Audubon Society's vocal opposition, the grassroots environmental movement that followed brought about laws prohibiting the hunting and sale of bird feathers. But enforcement of those laws in sparsely populated Florida was difficult, and on 2 occasions deputized Audubon wardens were murdered protecting wading bird nesting colonies. Fortunately, within a few years, societal pressure turned the tide against the practice of wearing feathers. The passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918 officially ended the feather trade. Given legal protection, most species managed to re-establish huge nesting populations in the Everglades by the 1940s, presumably migrating from remote populations in Central America and the Caribbean. Flamingos, however, did not. A long road to recovery in 1966, 40 years after hunting had ended. Allen estimated flamingo populations were only about 25% of what they had been in the previous century, with numbers plummeting from 160 to 8,000 to 40,000 breeding adults. They nested in significant numbers at only 4 locations compared to 29 historically. Flamingos' unique breeding behaviors and their longevity, they can live up to 50 years in the wild, may account for their struggle to bounce back. Other Florida wading birds can nest multiple times a year at different locations, laying 3 to 5 eggs at a time. Flamingos, on the other hand, nest only once a year, generally returning to the same location year after year, and lay only 1 egg. Furthermore, they prefer forming huge nesting colonies, with thousands of nests, in part due to their elaborate group courtship rituals. Reason to hope, as a result of their rarities in the 1930s to 1980s, scientists, including myself, believe that any flamingos sighted intermittently around Florida were not wild birds, but rather escapees from captive populations. The largest flock observed in the state between 1935 and 1930 was 14 birds spotted in Biscayne Bay in 1935, or on the day after Hurley racetrack in Miami imported a group of about 1,000 flamingos. The track's owners had failed to pinion the birds, and they simply flew away upon release. But my opinion began to change in 2002, when a flamingo that was banded as a chick at Rio Lagatos was photographed in Florida Bay. In 2012, the second bird from Rio Legatos was photographed. By that time, I had observed flamingos in Florida Bay on several occasions, including larger flamboyances of 24 and 64 individuals. Although I still thought the majority of these flocks were escapees, the banded birds provided some evidence that at least a few wild flamingos were starting to spend time in Florida. Then in 2015, my colleagues put a tracking device on a flamingo they had captured at the Key West Naval Air Station. Kunchai, as we called him, was given the Blue Band US 01 and released in Florida Bay in December 2015. He lived in Florida Bay for 2 years, and the fact that he stayed for that long was proof to me that it was possible for flamingos to make a